part two of my conversation with Ben Hunt, we dug deeper into the idea that we don't just tell stories, we live inside them. Stories shape our identities, our politics, even our sense of reality. And because of that, they can be powerful tools or dangerous weapons. We talked about how modern platforms, especially social media, are accelerating our drift toward a sort of hive mind, and how large language models like ChatGPT, while useful, risk replacing something far more important: real friendship, the kind that can tell us what we need to hear, even when we least want to hear it. From ancient wisdom traditions to emerging technologies, this was a wide-ranging conversation about the forces shaping how we think, connect, and find our way in this world. We hope you enjoy this discussion. Hello, Ben. Welcome back.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know it's great. I'm glad we had a chance or are getting a chance to do this part two. I think we left off the last conversation for viewers who are listening. They should definitely go check out that part one. We left off the last conversation in a really interesting place, where we started getting into, how AI, LLMs are going to impact the way human beings interact with narratives. And there are different ways that we interact with narratives. And so I was hoping we could explore that a little bit more today.
Yeah,
But before
I'd love
we
to.
before before we get into that, I kind of want to just review what is a semantic structure. I
Mhm.
really would love to like make that concrete concept for people. So maybe we could start there. Like, just give us a refresher. What is a semantic structure? Why are they important to our lives? And if you can give some examples, that would be great.
So happy to do that. And a semantic structure is a script. It's a story. It's a theme. It's a thesis. It's a story arc. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I think the way I like to describe is there's this old line in Hollywood that there are only five scripts, right? That there are only five scripts in all of Hollywood. And well, at least that's better than what Tolstoy, supposedly Tolstoy, said, that there are only two stories. There are only two stories. A man goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town, and that and there's a lot of truth in both of those statements. Only two stories in the world, only five scripts in Hollywood. In truth, and this is what we mean by semantic structure, it's a little bit larger than that, right? I mean, but it's still a finite number. One of my favorite sets of books is a compendium of all the legends and fairy tales in the world from every culture. And you can organize them by their story arc, by their characteristics. And, it's a multi volume set, but it's still a finite number. In all the history of the world, there are a finite number of stories that we tell each other. Um, one of my Another kind of famous example that comes out of, I'll call it Hollywood, comes out of television. It's the TV show Law and Order. So Law and Order has been on for 20 something seasons. It's this crazy franchise. And in the core Law and Order um, franchise, there have been 630 episodes, something like that. Way over 600 episodes filmed. There are only 12 scripts. There are only 12 scripts for those 600 and something episodes. They all follow the same format as the three-act play. Things get introduced at different points in times. There are only 12 scripts. So what we mean by semantic structure, I like to use the word a semantic signature, because I really do think of these ideas and themes and stories as being alive, like you and I are. They live in a different dimension, a dimension of semantics, dimension of meaning, and they leave their signature behind, like a chemical signature or the like. These ideas, they leave a signature behind. So you can think of these as the building blocks of, well, of certainly of unstructured data. Because we talk about unstructured data, we talk about the words we read, the words we hear, the things we see, the images we see, and we call it unstructured data. And of course, that's not right. right? If it were truly unstructured, we wouldn't be able to make heads or tails out of it. What we mean by a semantic signature or semantic structure is what gives the words, that jumble of words, what gives it meaning. And meaning to the human being is a story arc, a beginning, middle, and end. That's what we mean when we're talking about semantic signatures or semantic structures. Or in investing, we talk about our company, we talk about semantic factors. The way you talk about investment factors around, this measurable attribute of a company or an economy, you can talk about measurable attributes of story. And that's what opens up this whole new world because, to our topic today, foundational models, large language models, generative AI, whatever term you want to apply to it, these are all applications that live natively in that semantic dimension. Right? That's really the way I think of large language models. They're an operating system. They're an operating system for semantic understanding. So long-winded intro, but it's such a critical point. I'm glad you brought it up the way you did.
No, that's very interesting. It's this way of conceptualizing it that these things sort of. I was listening to your your conversation with Matt Ziegler the other day also, and it was a very nice podcast to listen to. We'll definitely link to that also. But you were describing it as like these ideas exist in a different, almost like a different dimension. It's a way of thinking about it, right? And they have a life of their own. And I guess what you're saying is that the LLMs are kind of an operating system to sort of interface with that can interface with that dimension. Is that a way of
Absolutely.
thinking about it? Yeah.
It, yes, they are native to that layer. They are native to the semantic layer of information. Um, that's what
And
they're based on.
and these stories they have a big impact on us. I think the whole idea is like it's like there is this thing called meaning, which these stories invoke or they contain or whatever. And then when we are impacted by those stories, they produce this sense of meaning in us, and then they give us kind of a they help us create a map to sort of navigate the world, something of that nature, right? And so uh, you know um, these stories they're very critical to sort of how we make sense of ourselves. Like I think you were talking about in that conversation also, like every human being has their story, right? And I think it was something like in the context of investing, whenever a stock price moves, it's because some human told themselves a story, right? And then
Mhm.
they took an action, and you know, uh, so like I kind of want to build this connection. It sort of got me thinking, like, you know, what is our relationship with like stories in our own life? Does every human being have some story that they're telling themselves that's sort of guiding their life, and can a human being exist without a story? Maybe I can pose it to you that way. Um, uh, and then yeah, you can sort of riff off that, and we can take it from there.
Well, I'd say that it's a human being can't exist well without story. Um, maybe probably, and I would probably suspect not at all. Um, human beings, our our entire brain changed with the advent of language. Language is like a virus that infected us, a symbiote, really, right? I mean, it's our physiology has changed so dramatically to accommodate words, language, both in the shape and size of our brain, the internal wiring of our brain, how much of our brain is devoted to words and language, even our throat, in the way we swallow and speak. The Homo sapiens is the only animal, right, that cannot eat and vocalize at the same time. We give such biological precedence to our ability to think in words and to speak and communicate in words. Now, that said, the human animal is this amazing thing. What is also true is that there are humans that are very successful. You can make the way they actually don't think in words. Um, it's a rare phenomenon, but not totally unheard of. So what I think, and this is going to sound maybe a little crazy, right? And this is why I'm saying that the stories are always there. Even if you're not thinking in words, you're thinking in story. I think that words are an enormous advance in the communication of story, but they're not I don't think they're fundamental to story. I think story is actually fundamental to words. They're foundational to words. So there's a lot going on here, right? I think that the development of language and words, it changed the way we think. I mean, human beings thought before we had words. We just didn't think in words. My strong belief is that a lot of uh, certainly mammalian and some, I think, non-mammalian species do think in story. Some primates have some limited words, but it's really with humans where the word facility took off and it made our ability to use story, to create new story, to preserve story that much more powerful. And like I say, it changed our entire biology over a period of, some hundreds of that pretty quickly. Really, only a period of like 100,000 years, our entire biology has changed to accommodate language and words. I think that what we're undergoing today is another change, and it comes from, um, I'll put it in the framework of social media. Words are designed for us to communicate stories to each other and in small groups, but face to face. What social media demands, not just allows, but demands, is not one to one communication, but one to many communication. So that when I do something on Twitter, what have you, I I know I'm speaking to a crowd. And anybody who responds to me knows that they are speaking to a crowd. We speak differently when we speak to a crowd. And what I want to suggest to your audience is we start to think differently when we are constantly speaking to a crowd. So, in exactly the same way that the development of language and words reshaped human society, human biology, I also think we're in a current reshaping. Not enough time to reshape biology, I don't think, but certainly it's been enough time to start, and you're seeing this for sure, to reshape human society. I think it's a negative reshaping. I think it reshapes us towards a society that I'll call is the hive, because it's a crowd-based society as opposed to a individualistic society. And I really do think that's part of the driving force in the crisis we have in, I'm going to call it small L liberalism, meaning individualism, uh, the idea that you have personal liberty and rights that cannot be infringed upon by the crowd. I think that's all falling away. And I think that our means of communicating story Now, to a crowd, I think that's a big part of it. Another long-winded answer, but man, you're asking some good ones here.
No, that's really that's pretty profound. I want to double click on this more and then take it into the conversation on LLMs and just your point about language as a virus that infected the mind. One of my co-founders here at Tuscan Quill, she says she calls language the devil, you know, and I think her thought process is probably a little similar to where you're coming from. That you try to use language to capture reality, but it can never fully capture reality, right? It's
Well,
always like partial. Mhm.
well, so I the devil is a tough one, right? I think that the expulsion
And
of from the
and
garden of
mhm.
Adam and Eve is, the knowledge of good and evil. I think that is very much the development of language. And, that's an old idea, right? I remember Carl Sagan, The Dragons of Eden, famous book by Carl Sagan, had that as a premise, and other people have had that premise as well. But Cormac McCarthy, one of my favorite authors, really the last, I don't know, probably 15 years of his life, he was based at the Santa Fe Institute, where he really wasn't writing much fiction anymore. He was really engaged and did some interesting writing on the phenomenon of language and how it is our, I'm not going to call it original sin, but it is that knowledge of good and evil that language makes possible.
Yeah, it's like it's necessary. Like you said, language is how we convey story, and story is so fundamental to, how we operate. Story, as you said, is even more fundamental than language. So we needed something with which to convey it, but it also creates all kinds of problems. And just sort of coming back to what you were saying, it seems like we exist in stories at multiple levels, right? Like in our personal
Mhm.
life, we may have a story, whatever it is. I'm embedded in this web of relationships. These are my responsibilities. So these, like, let's say you're a father and you have a family. That's a kind of story, right? Like
Yep.
this is who I am vis-a-vis these people, and these are my responsibilities. I'm supposed to do this, or you're a young up and coming person, like you're in the story of, I want to prove myself, I want to prove my worth. There's kind of a hero's journey, maybe arc or something like that. And we're all in these stories, and it's the stories that kind of give us a sense of meaning and give us a sense of direction. And so we have to kind of pick what, or maybe subconsciously we pick, or consciously, I don't know, but we're sort of always in these. And then at another level, there's a story of society, right? Like what's going on? Where is our society right now? Where is our society going? And it's like we're in that also. And I think somewhere what you're saying is the way we're just totally immersed in this digital environment nowadays, where it's like I think the way you've written about it before is like the crowd is looking at the crowd, right? And so
Mhm.
everybody's looking at everybody else to see what does everybody else think and try to guess what does everybody else think. And because it's all happening out in the open and we're constantly in it almost all the time, somehow that's like messing with how we construct the stories that we believe we're in some way that is maybe not healthy for our own individual um, psychology. Is that roughly right? Like we're spending so much time being the crowd, staring at the crowd, trying to figure out what does everybody else think, that that somehow creates this kind of hive
Mm.
mind kind of behavior. Is that roughly a right way of describing the phenomenon?
It's a big part of it. But let me kind of back up a second because the fact that we as human beings are, in the biological sense of the word, social animals, I want to emphasize that the biology part of that, right? It so there are four enormous species of animals on Earth that are technically social animals called eusocial, EU social animals. It's the ant, it's the termite, it's the bee, and it's the human being, right? For classically eusocial animals. And what all four of these species have in common is that they're intra-species communication is near constant, right? All four of these species, they swim in an ocean of unstructured data. Now, how do you make sense of that communication, the constant communication of a termite mound, a beehive, an ant colony, a human civilization or society? Well, those insects, they use pheromones, right? And they are biologically evolved to neurologically respond to the pheromone communications that tell a story. We are biologically evolved to respond not to chemical pheromones, but to words, but to words. So it it's always a little, I think unsettling to talk about a biological foundation, a neurological foundation to social things. Uh, what I'm saying is that we are hardwired, biologically hardwired to respond to stories, to the storytelling, and that stories can act, words can act as magic spells on human beings. Again, a lot of that's the whole idea of a magic spell. You speak certain words and things happen. What what has changed today is that I think three, three big things have changed, right? The first is that we've all taken into our lives these devices willingly, right? Nobody's forcing us to keep on the screen. We want to be on the screen. This is a device that is designed to give me messages, and I am hooked on it because I am biologically designed to want to hear human messages. So that's one. So the ubiquity of that, not pheromone, but word communication, we are more inundated in it than ever. We're never alone from it. And it's not that somebody forces us to do it. We want it. We want it. Right? That's one. Uh, Two is that our society has um, and again, this is not, there's not a value communication here. What I'm describing is all systems move to lower energy states. That means more efficient. That's all that means. All systems, this is entropy. You move towards lower energy states, you move towards more efficient states. What is fascinating to me about those three other eusocial species that I described, the ant, the termite, and the bee, for all practical purposes, evolution in those species stopped. It ranges from, 80 million years ago, 80 million years ago for the bee to like 180 million years ago for the termite. They haven't evolved. The termite has not evolved significantly, right? I mean, it's evolved to kind of fill different it's called adaptive evolution for or radiative evolution to fill in different environmental niches. But there's been no real evolution from the termite in 180 million years. And that's because that termite mound, the termite colony, is incredibly efficient. It's incredibly efficient. Ditto ants, ditto bees. Our society, and we can call this neoliberalism, we can call this capitalism. And again, this is not, I am a capitalist, right? I am. Our society is evolving towards more and more efficiency, not fairness, right? Not democracy, not anything else, but efficiency. And that evolution of efficiency, right, also manifests itself in our media system and our media communication, where it's now 24/7, where it's again, it's not that we can cut it off. We don't want to ever cut it off. We want it all the time. It's much more centralized, the media voices that we have. That's a structural change, and you can't unring these bells, is what I'm saying, right? These are one-way paths. I think we can and we should resist it, but this is entropy. This is evolution, right? This you move towards lower energy states. The third part, and this is the part where I think we can do something about it, is that a lot of individual humans have figured this out, that there is an ability to use words and to use language for effect, for personal power and wealth, uh, and not for, I'll call it a social end. My strong belief is that effective politicians have always known this to be the case. What's different today is that everybody's in on the act. Every CEO knows that to get another bump on your stock price, you need to tell a better story. Every central banker is telling a story, forward guidance. In our in every aspect of our society, from parenting to education to sports, it's, are you telling a truthy story? Not are you telling the truth, but are you telling that truthy, Colbert's great phrase is truthiness. Are you telling a story? So our the technology, the social evolution, human ingenuity, you put those together and you have a system today where words and storytelling are increasingly used to turn us into a hive where we're the drones, if you will, right? And that's what I think we can and should and will resist, is that intentional or our voluntary abdication of our free will and the intentional usurpation of our autonomy and free will by the state and the oligarchy, as I like to put it.
Wow,
Heavy stuff.
that's quite a story. I feel like you could write like a modern day epic, like a modern day Odyssey off of it. It's so fundamentally, if I understand what you're saying, it's like the problem is within us and the solution is within us. Like we're biologically hardwired to want to understand. We're like a socially coordinated species. That's what we evolved to do. To your point about language causing all kinds of changes within us, it's like we evolved to be able to coordinate with other human beings. So there's a drive in us to want to know what is everybody else thinking and what is everybody else saying. And now so with social media, that's just scaled up to where you can do that all the time from the convenience of your home with as many people as possible. Like the limit of that, I guess, would be like what all 8 billion people are thinking all the time. Maybe that's like at the limit. And so that's we've naturally drifted in that direction, but there's also something in the human being that chafes against that and sees that as a loss of some kind of independence. And what you're saying is that's where like the Rebel Alliance will will sort of emerge out
Well,
of
I mean, it's
that. Yeah, that's tongue in
and
cheek,
not to
but
get no, no,
yeah.
no, no, and not to
Have
get
I
too far off on this,
have I
but
captured it? Is that kind of what you're saying?
you have captured it, and I'll just I can kind of leave it at this. All the great religions of the world, all of them, have at their core the notion that divinity is all of the words You see this in Taoism, you see this in Hinduism, you certainly see it in Christianity. John 1, I am the Word, that the divinity is in the words. So our resistance to the hive is found in these old stories, that spark of divinity, which, yes, is in each of us. And it's so you're right that the problem is within us. Uh, and it is exacerbated by where our society is evolving. And the resistance, as always, comes from our hearts. It really does. And and I say this, I'm not a religious guy at all. I'm really not. But I also am in awe of the power. I do believe in that semantic dimension where that power of the word, the Greeks called it the logos. Um, Taoism calls it the Tao, right? Where there is that source of energy, of meaning, that does resist the hive and the abdication of our autonomy.
Totally. I want to explore this rabbit hole of, religious philosophy with you, but then we'll never get to the LLMs. But it's interesting that you say
It
that.
comes, it all comes back. It does. I
Yeah,
really do want to go to the LLMs, right? Because
yeah,
I
yeah.
really do think that they are, um, calling it a tool is not quite right. But anyway, yeah, I'll let you phrase the question, but yeah, this is
Okay.
where we should definitely get into it.
Okay, yeah. But, I mean, I definitely think I'm picking up what you're putting down in terms of you know uh, language and religious. It's just interesting because the first verse of the Tao is the Tao that can be spoken is not the real Tao, and yet
Correct.
you're saying is. But we'll set that aside. If we can get to it at the end, we'll come back to it. But fundamentally, okay, words are spells. You speak a word, it can have an effect. And I think last time when we spoke, we were like, this creates different questions. One is people can instrumentalize it, as you said, for their own gain. Also, the wizards of society who sort of understand the magic and how it works can instrumentalize it for their own gains, or they can try to defend themselves against that instrumentalization. And then there's another thing of like we tell stories to ourselves, and the stories we tell ourselves shape our self-concept in a very deep way. Um, Maybe all the way down, it's just story, our identities and our understanding of who we are. It's just layers of stories that we're telling ourselves. Um, so there's the instrumental aspect, and then there's like the self-knowledge aspect. Both are related to the power of words and the power of stories. Now, how do LLMs come in and intersect with this, and change the way that we relate to these things. And you can start wherever you want. I think last time you spoke a little bit about the instrumental side. If you want to start with the self side of it this time around, feel free to do so. But I'll set it up that way, and you can hit it however you want.
So I think that the way most people use, um, I'll call it generative AI, and here we'll get into agentic AI in a second, and the like. But I think that the way most people hearing this, or their interaction with a non-human intelligence, is through a conversation with ChatGPT, Claude, or whoever. And that, as in part of a personal storytelling, I think is really useful. Um, because what you have to, I'm just going to pick on ChatGPT, and we'll stick with that instead of using so. So when you have when you're in a conversation with ChatGPT, I think the important thing is to think of it as a conversation. And you're in conversation with a master storyteller because that's what it means to be native to the semantic layer of information, right? Which this is what it means to say that, oh, there's an embeddings architecture where there's a probabilistic linking between words in the dimension of meaning in terms of a semantic connection. What it means is that when you have a conversation with ChatGPT, it is the essence of storytelling. That's what it does. It tells you a story. Now, specifically, it's designed to tell you a pleasing story. And so, what what is pleasing to you is what you need to set out very clearly and to prevent, I'll say the effort, it's effort in to tell you a pleasing story rather than a story that you might find more useful. Because we all enjoy pleasing stories, and often pleasing stories are also useful stories. But sometimes a pleasing story comes into conflict between a useful story, what we need to hear. So a in a conversation with ChatGPT, there has to be a union between pleasingness and usefulness. Uh, ChatGPT is never going to tell you something you really don't want to hear. A friend will. A true friend will. Will tell you something. It's not going to be easy for you to hear this, but you need to hear it. You're never going to get that in a conversation with ChatGPT. So understanding that difference, I'll call it, I don't even want to call it a limitation. It's just a difference. And because I also wouldn't call your friend to say, oh, they're limited because they haven't read everything that human beings have ever written, right? Like ChatGPT could. So I really do think of them as, both my conversations with friends and my conversations with ChatGPT as being incredibly valuable conversations for me to advance my own self-awareness and self-knowledge. But what you have to understand is that both humans and uh, ChatGPT, we're both storytellers at heart. ChatGPT is built on, it is native to storytelling. And it's telling stories that to please you. So the stories you're going to hear from your friend and ChatGPT are going to be different on that dimension. From ChatGPT, it's pure storytelling, augmented by access to all the connections of knowledge. So that the stories it can tell you, I find to be more useful, actually much more useful than most of the stories I get from talking with friends. But for those times where you need to have a useful but non-pleasing story, the only place you're going to get that is from someone who loves you. You're never going to get that from a ChatGPT. So let me stop there in terms of the kind of the personal storytelling. That's how I'd recommend seeing it. It's a conversation. Both are incredibly valuable and useful, but there's a class of useful, non-pleasing stories that you can only get from human beings.
Okay. Um, I mean, just to devil's advocate a little bit, and again, I'm not a super user of the LLMs yet. I anticipate at some point I will become that, but couldn't you just prompt Claude or ChatGPT to like be honest with me? Like give it to me straight, like that could be part of your prompt, and then wouldn't that change it? Like just, or is that still in the same paradigm of ChatGPT is just telling me what I want to hear? Like what, how do you process that?
The it's one thing to be to it's for for your friends or for ChatGPT to be honest with you. Um, there's another there's another element to telling someone a difficult story about themselves, a truth about themselves that can be necessary in a life, right? That you're never going to get from ChatGPT. You're just not because it's it again it is native to storytelling, and its prime directive is the story needs to make sense to me. See, the problem with telling a friend or a friend telling you or a loved one, you telling a loved one or a loved one telling you a story you really don't want to hear is that you don't believe it. It doesn't make sense to you. And so it doesn't work for Chat GPT. You say, okay, be honest with me. And Chat GPT, well, I'm going to be tough, be honest with you. For you to accept that, if you accept it, then I'm telling you, it wasn't honest enough. Right? Because there are a class of conversations that human beings need to have. We don't want to have them that force us to see ourselves in a not nice way. And and you're never going to get that from a generative AI.
Sorry, computer just glitched on me, but okay. There's some subtle quality here in terms of this like human conversation that I can kind of sense what you're getting at, and one thing I wanted to do in this discussion of LLMs is like map out possible futures. Like, okay, the LLMs are going to impact the way we interface with narrative. What's a healthy way for that to develop? What does that look like in its details? And what is a kind of unhealthy way for that to develop? Does that make sense? So, with respect to these conversations, like we're now, now we're all going to have a conversation partner in our pocket. We already do basically. And if we want
Mhm.
to turn to that conversation partner at any time for anything, we can. Um, but like you said, there's this issue with there's a certain subtle class of conversations that we can't yet have with the LLMs and maybe never can because they're just expert storytellers, whereas a human friend is a storyteller plus something else, to us. Um, so what is it like if humanity was wise, which I know is asking a lot, but if we were, what is a healthy way for this new paradigm to develop where this conversation partner in our pocket, we interact with that in a healthy way and, you know, et cetera, versus, and what is a danger that you see that if we don't manage it well, the LLMs could impact us in this way. You know what I mean? In some negative way.
Sure.
Um, and then we can take that same framework and apply it to sort of the instrumental side of people. You'd mentioned before how important it is to have open source LLMs. I think our last conversation was before the whole DeepSeek thing happened, so now that's happened, and the world has changed a bit. So we can get into that afterwards. What's a healthy way that humanity can interface with this conversation partner in our pocket, and what's an unhealthy way that could develop?
Well, I, I think at the root of all personal and societal yeah, every level of problem, it's failing to call things by their proper name. And so the Chat GPT is not your friend. It's not. It's because it that notion of friend, that's a story, right? That the chat intelligence can mimic perfectly, right? But does not exist intrinsically. And that's fine. That's fine. I think of the um, the non-human intelligence really as genies. I really do think of them as genies. And like any genie, the wishes are granted regardless of the motivations of the person doing the wishing. And a lot of times the wishes come back to bite you in the ass. And that's exactly the way it is with the conversations we have with our personal genies. If they if they alienate us, and I'm using that word, alienation is the scourge of modernity. Alienation means separation. And alienation is what is intentionally done to us to cut us off from human connections, both in the present with loved ones, but also with the past. It's an important aspect of modernity. Your your ancestors are gone, right? And it's time you have to move on. It's important to move on. That's all very intentional, and again, as part of this evolutionary to a lower energy state of society. So, what's the healthy relationship? The healthy relationship is to recognize that this is a genie in this little bottle, and like any genie can give amazing, grant amazing wishes. The wishes can bite you in the ass, particularly as they alienate you from human connection. So, in all things moderation, we are no smarter than, you know, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle 2,500 years ago. And you you can't let yourself go into that world in the same way that you can't ignore it. It's a wonderful genie to have, but it's not your friend.
Yeah, it's this is interesting. I think I saw a tweet the other day where somebody put out that like also ChatGPT is not your friend is definitely how we're going to market this I'm
Yeah,
just kidding.
yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Uh, um, yeah,
But a lot of your human friends are not your friends either, Nimai. So,
yeah.
so the whole what is the good life is finding great-hearted friends, magnanimous friends. This is what Aristotle said more than 2,000 years ago, and nothing has changed. That's the good life is finding your pack of human beings who treat you as an autonomous end in itself. They do not treat you as a means to an end. They treat you as you. And they require that they get the same in return. All of this, right? All of philosophy, all of uh, secular belief systems are about this. It is not changed in thousands of years, and it's not going to change for thousands of years to go. We are told that it changed, but it doesn't change. The secret to a happy, good life is find some good friends. That's it. That is literally it.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was gonna bring up, and then you brought it up with the point about alienation is, when you were like your friends are the ones who will have, these kinds of real conversations with you. And the question that came to my mind is like, how many people actually have those kinds of friends nowadays? It seems like a vanishing.
Probably most
Um,
of us do. I mean, you're
yeah,
born into your pack, right? Yeah, and
yeah,
and and I understand that for a lot of people out there, their family is sadly not a good
mm,
pack for them.
mm, mm,
But for the vast majority of human beings, that family
yeah,
is a good foundation for a pack.
yeah,
And then we go through various steps in life,
mm,
and at every step, the best advice I can give to anyone is find your pack. Find people who treat you as an autonomous human being not as a means to an end, and who require you to do the same. Do that, and your life's going to be a good life.
Totally. Yeah, and I guess a part of that is, accepting that this friend of yours will have their flaws. I mean, I just coming back to that tweet that I saw the other day where I'm just paraphrasing it. I don't remember the exact details, but it was something along the lines of like kind of explaining how like of course ChatGPT, will be a much better emotional partner than another person because they're never gonna like be passive aggressive with you or they're never gonna, you know, uh, give you the cold shoulder or, change their emotional state based on how you behave. Like they'll just be perfect. It'll never be a disturbing situation for you. Just like you said, ChatGPT will always say what's pleasing to me. It's never going to behave in a way I can't predict and that may disturb me. Um, and so then when you think about that, you can kind of sense the danger that you're talking about, where these genies will just give us what we want, and then why would we interface with another human being who's unpredictable? It just sort of exacerbates that alienation. Is kind of the dystopian version of this. But then you lose out on that thing that unpredictable human being can give you in those real conversations. Um, yeah, that's pretty scary. And
Yeah,
and I guess
yeah, it's I mean, human beings are messy, right? And the this digital world feels clean. Um, and there is solace in that, and there's comfort in that, because a lot of people's human lives are messy and not easy. Right? And again, there's a lot of, stories around that where you want to go to that clean country as opposed to living in this messy, very difficult world that we're in right now. So I'm not saying that any of this is easy. I'm really not. Um, but I'm saying that's where we need to work hard, right? We find our autonomy of mind within a community of people who've got your back. And combining those two, again, it's not either or. I don't want to be without my genie. I've I think better, I write better, I've discovered so much through the help of my genie. Um, and for me to be a human being and live with a full heart, it needs to express itself in love and receive that in return. And that's what makes for a full life.
how does I want to do a time check? I didn't check in the beginning. Where are we at in terms of how much time you have left? Because I have
Maybe,
several questions in my
maybe,
mind. Yeah, five
maybe
minutes.
five more. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Then I'll let you take this. I mean, I think we've covered a lot, a very sort of beautiful territory here, actually. Very thought-provoking. I'll let you. I'll just throw two questions at you, and you can combine them or take them wherever you want. Um, One is, uh, uh, how does one go about finding and building their pack, as you say? What is the mechanism? Like if I'm like, you're right, I want to do this, I need this aspect to have, that beautiful life worth living. So how do I do that in the world of today? And two would be, we started this conversation talking about how stories are so fundamental to our own understanding of ourselves and how we navigate the world. We talked about, the father who has, or mother who is a parent and has managing a household. There's certain stories they tell themselves that orient them or whatever at every stage of life. How do you find the good stories? Like I think that there are a lot of people I know in my life personally, there were periods where I was like looking for a story. Actually I was, I didn't know what was the right story in which to invest myself in.
Yep.
And I suspect, and then what you do is you scour the internet and try to find it, like maybe back in the day you'd look for some wise person or something. I don't know. But how do you identify the good stories, that you can that are worth investing in? So I'll long-winded, sorry
Yeah.
about that, but those are my two
No, no, no,
questions.
that's perfect.
Take us away.
Two,
Yeah.
two good stories to end up on. So the first about finding your pack. So there's the classic strategy for repeated game interactions for success in a competitive world is tit for tat with forgiveness. What the hell does that mean? What it means is your first interaction, be prepared to take the loss, to take the L, to put yourself out there and be open enough in an interaction with somebody to treat them as an autonomous human being, not as a means to an end. And hopefully they will respond reciprocally to say, no, let me do you this favor. Let me go out of my way to do this. Let's have this conversation, not because I want to get something out of it. I'm not having this conversation with you because I want to get, a recommendation, or I want to get money, or I want to get sex, or I want to get a thing. I'm not using you as a means to an end. I'm just, we're just being friends here. Hopefully you get that response. You might not, right? And what tit for tat means is if you put yourself out there, say, hey, I'd like to make this connection. And what you get back is using you as a means to an end, using you. Then you say, nope, we're done. We're done. You're leave yourself open for this, and finding your pack doesn't mean being a patsy. Right? Now, it does mean forgiving. So it means that if that same person then some point in the future puts themselves out there, you don't act for revenge. Oh, you used me. So now I'm going to, you're putting yourself open there. Ha ha. Now I'm going to use you. No, it means that you reciprocate. You're, you have forgiveness, right? You're not a patsy. You're not a doormat, but you make the first effort to be real and to not treat somebody as a means to an end. You're not talking with them because I want to get something from you. And you hope that they respond in kind. And if they do, that becomes the start of a relationship of friends. So, where you find those people to interact with can be at work, can be at school, can be at with your at with your kids, their schools, church, whatever it can be. But you always have to just be looking for it. Just be looking for it. Looking for a community of your own. So that's one. Two, where do you find stories that are worth following? If something's been around for a long time, that's a pretty good sign that it's probably something to it. So it really is the old stories, and uh, I think that exists most clearly in religion. And I say that again as a non-religious person who doesn't have that faith, but I know the old stories and I love the old stories as a secular human being. Uh, you can find it in all sorts of places, right? But it's almost always something that's been around for a long time. Uh, that's where you
That's
find the old stories that mean something.
no, that's a good objective heuristic that appeals to the rational mind. And I also deeply admire those old stories myself. I think there's a reason they've stuck around. Although, I mean, all kinds of complications have arisen based on how humans have interacted with them. But anyway, that's a separate podcast, I guess. Um, anyway, thank you, Ben. This was great. I learned a lot and appreciate you giving the time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime.